Hello everybody, my name is Lego Lee and welcome to my Lego set review today for set number 21321. This is the LEGO Ideas International Space Station. This set here retails for $69.99 here in the United States. It's ages 16 plus and has 864 pieces. And this is a front look at your absolutely gorgeous box. And there is a quick look at the back of the box. And included with this set is one very nice instruction manual that on the first few pages here, there's a couple pages explaining the history of the International Space Station itself. On the next page here, you have the guy who designed the fan-submitted project on the LEGO Ideas website. And then finally, you kind of have a little bit of history and summary of what LEGO Ideas is. In the year 1998, the first pieces of the International Space Station were officially launched into space. Nearly 22 years later, 15 nations come together to run this absolutely monumentous achievement of human engineering. This thing is one of the most important scientific vessels ever created, and LEGO has recreated it here beautifully, and this design is an absolute behemoth. This thing is almost 20 inches wide. Despite being in a very small micro scale, this build is humongous and can't really even fit into the frame of my camera because it's just that big. I zoom out here to see the edges of my light box because I want to do a size comparison with a very recent LEGO space-based set. This is the NASA Apollo 11 lunar lander, and this set here costs $30 more than the International Space Station, has about 200 more pieces, but it is absolutely dwarfed by the sheer scope of this model. Now, as I mentioned, and to the chagrin of a lot of LEGO fans, this build is entirely micro scale. And while it would have been cool to get a more accurate minifig scale version of this particular vessel, that would have been way too much to ask because this thing is huge and it's pretty big even in the micro scale. And there's so many fine little details that are accomplished with the most creative use of parts. However, before we talk about the build itself, we have to talk about what the build is actually on, and that's this very nicely designed display stand that is cemented with a really cool printed plaque that says International Space Station. And LEGO actually went above and beyond with this display with a satellite, a little transport vehicle, a couple of micro astronauts, and a nice space shuttle small mini build. This is a very cool space shuttle build, and I especially love the use of the LEGO Fez piece to make the engines at the back. That is a brilliant use of parts. But moving on for the display stand of this space station, we can talk about one of the easily most important things of the International Space Station, and that is the plethora of solar panels to help power this vehicle. The International Space Station orbits Earth almost 16 times a day, and it needs a lot of energy to do so to also help run all these scientific experiments and various things that the space station has to do. So it has these massive solar panels, and LEGO has done a very good job recreating them here. This design is not super complicated, but it looks very good, and they actually provided an ample amount of articulation with these solar panels. You can actually rotate each of them, which is really cool, and then the greater build here also rotates as well. So some nice movement with this design, but easily the best part of this design, these pieces, all of these pieces you see here that are repeated 16 times throughout this build, everything is printed. In fact, there are no stickers in this set, and there's over 50 printed pieces. That is absolutely glorious to see. Speaking of glorious, the small little details of this space station here are so finely captured, and LEGO did an absolutely tremendous job just with the way the pieces are shaped and connected onto this build. It's all done really well. However, there's actually a pretty big but here. Unfortunately, because these pieces are really small and this build is very skinny, a lot of these pieces are not attached on super securely. You can see, for example, a piece like this one up top here. This part is only attached on by a couple of studs, and actually the connection they used for this part onto here is a Bionicle style ball joint, which is good and it's sturdy and it makes the articulation work really well, but it was a relatively difficult thing to attach onto this vehicle, and a lot of times throughout the build of this set you would attach one thing on, but the rest of the build is so finicky it would knock two other things off. You kind of had to backtrack and rebuild parts of this set. I get why that's a problem, and it's really unfortunate, and I'm not sure if the LEGO designer could have avoided it at this scale. But in 2020, we have very high expectations for how sturdy a LEGO model is going to be, and it's mostly sturdy once it's complete, as long as you know where to pick this thing up. Always pick it up from the center section right here, because if you don't, things are going to fall off, and that can get quite annoying. So yes, there are some stability issues with this design, but it still looks fantastic. I mean, this is all micro building, but it looks so great. I love the use of these pieces right here and how they're angled. The roller skates are used very effectively throughout this design. And then there's a pretty cool little play feature here. You have this robotic arm right here that actually has decent amount of articulation. You can move it up and down, side to side, things like that. And you actually can attach a satellite build onto that robotic arm, and that is a very cool display, and I really like that playability feature. As I carefully handle this vehicle to try not knock anything off of this kind of fragile design, we can get to this back section here, which is easily the most detailed part of this build. This build is kind of chaotic looking, but it's really well done. There's plenty more printed pieces for these satellites. I love the use of the balloon kind of pieces right here. Nice designs. That's a printed astromech droid head. All of these dishes here use a really clever combination of parts. It's simply just a ski piece in gold and then a metallic silver dish piece, and I think that is super cool, and it makes for a fantastic look. These pieces up top here can rotate just a little bit, and there's a ton of crazy design work. I mean, just look at this. It looks insane. Lots of satellites being docked, the living chambers, places for docking the vehicles and whatnot. It all looks super cool. Again though, it's very finicky. Things tend to fall off if you hit them even with the slightest amount of pressure, so that is annoying, but it all makes for such a cool looking design. Trying to get a wide shot of this vehicle without showing off the ugly edges of my light box is pretty much impossible. This model here is gigantic, and the price per piece is very good at $70, and the size of this thing for 70 bucks is great. I mean, you saw how much bigger it is than the $100 Lunar Lander. This is a fantastic value, and as a display piece, I mean, this set is ages 16 plus. It's not meant for playability. As a display piece, I'm going to be very proud to put this thing on display on my shelf next to the Lunar Lander, the Women of NASA set, and of course the Saturn V. This is a great addition to the NASA, the big LEGO space exploration collection. However, I did mention throughout this review that this thing has a lot of pieces that are finicky and they tend to fall off, and the build of this set was frustrating because of that. And while this thing looks really good, it is still micro scale, and I know a lot of people don't like micro scale. I think ultimately it was a good decision to make it micro scale just so the set was somewhat affordable, because if it was any bigger it would have been way too large to put on a shelf and it would have costed a ton of money. But the micro scale does have its limitations, and the fact that this model here is really fragile, and we're in 2020 and you expect LEGO sets to not be fragile like that anymore, is definitely an issue that has to be noted. However, it's not a big enough problem for me to not recommend this set. If you like what you see here, if you're into this sort of space stuff like I am, this set definitely gets one of my highest recommendations. That's why the International Space Station here is going to get an 8 out of 10 from me. Those are just my thoughts though. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, while you're at it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. I'm all over the place, and maybe consider becoming a Patreon supporter, because if you do, give me like $1 a month. It really helps spark my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. LEGO Lee 329 signing off.